Hello everyone, I am Kenshin. Welcome to Talking About History. On May 10, 2024, after the United Nations recognized Palestine's membership, the Israeli representative to the United Nations shredded a copy of the United Nations Charter on stage, and even said that the United Nations was about to die. Regardless of whether what the representative said was correct or not, but looking back at the performance of the United Nations and its affiliated organizations in the past few years, it is true that corruption is bound to happen when the organization becomes old. This reminds people of the dissolution of the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations. Today, we will only focus on why the League of Nations was disbanded. The first initiator is President Woodrow Wilson. When Woodrow Wilson rolled up to the post-war bargaining table, he came packing a vision for a future that seemed too good to be true. His 14 points laid it all out: no more shady secret treaties, freedom to sail the high seas, a thumbs up for Poland's sovereignty, and the peace de resistance, a League of Nations to keep the peace. Now, you'd think everyone would be on board with this dreamy plan, right? Wrong. Turns out, Wilson's fellow Allied leaders weren't exactly jumping for joy at the idea. Britain, with its mighty Royal Navy ruling the waves, wasn't too keen on sharing the ocean with everyone else. And France, well, they were all about giving Germany a good ol' smackdown with hefty reparations, not Wilson's touchy-feely olive branch. But Wilson, he wasn't about to back down. He held firm to his vision of a League of Nations, his trump card in the game of post-war diplomacy. And in the end, it made the cut in the Treaty of Versailles, the official peace treaty signed on June 28, 1919, marking the end of World War I. Skepticism of the League in the U.S. Senate. Wilson's dream of seeing the Treaty of Versailles become law in the United States hit a major roadblock: the Senate. And to make matters worse, it was controlled by the very folks who weren't exactly singing Wilson's praises, the Republicans. Now, here's the kicker: Wilson didn't exactly do himself any favors. He waltzed into the Paris Peace Conference without a single Republican in tow, and let's just say the Senate wasn't too pleased about it. They saw it as a slap in the face, a sign that Wilson expected them to rubber stamp the treaty without so much as a howdy do. Leading the charge against ratification was none other than Henry Cabot Lodge, the Senate Majority Leader and Wilson's political nemesis. Lodge wasn't buying what Wilson was selling, especially when it came to the League of Nations. He argued that joining the League would be like handing over the keys to the kingdom, weakening U.S. sovereignty and dragging America into foreign quagmires at the drop of a hat. But Lodge didn't stop there. He whipped out George Washington's farewell address like a trump card, reminding everyone about old George's advice to steer clear of foreign entanglements. And in the wake of World War I and the Red Scare, with anti-immigrant sentiments running high, the last thing the Senate wanted was to risk stirring up more trouble by joining the League. So, despite the public support for the League of Nations, the Senate said, thanks but no thanks. Wilson's dream lay in tatters, crushed under the weight of political gridlock and partisan bickering. It was a bitter pill to swallow for the man who had dared to dream of a world without war. The League is formed, but America sits out. The Treaty of Versailles, with its League of Nations clause, crashed and burned not once, but twice, when the U.S. Senate gave it the old thumbs down in 1919 and 1920. It was a historic first, and not the kind you'd want to brag about. And just to add insult to injury, Woodrow Wilson, the man with the plan, suffered a devastating stroke while on a cross-country tour promoting the League, leaving him bedridden for months. Wilson's incapacitation threw a wrench in the works. Without his leadership, there was little hope of rallying support for another Senate vote on the treaty. And when the Democratic Party passed him over for a third term as president, it was like the final nail in the coffin for America's League of Nations dreams. But while the US sat on the sidelines, 32 other nations jumped on board the League train. It officially kicked off in 1920, but right out the gate, it hit a snag. With the former Allies and Central Powers facing off like rival gangs, thanks to Russia being too busy duking it out in the Civil War to join the party, the League found itself deadlocked on crucial issues like disarmament. Nations ignore League rules. The League of Nations might have looked good on paper, with its fancy council and grand headquarters in Geneva, but when push came to shove, it was about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. See, the thing was, the League didn't have any real muscle to flex. It was like trying to keep the peace with a sternly worded letter and a pat on the back. Take Japan, for example. They waltzed into the League, took a seat at the table, and then promptly got up and walked out when they were called out for invading Manchuria in 1931. China, a fellow League member, cried foul and begged for help, but the League just shrugged its shoulders and looked the other way. No economic sanctions, no consequences, just business as usual. And let's not forget the big players in the room, Britain and France. Sure, they were supposed to be the League's heavy hitters, but after getting their wallets drained by World War I, they weren't exactly eager to throw more cash at the problem. Peacekeeping, that sounded great on paper, but when it came down to it, nobody wanted to pony up the troops and resources needed to actually make it happen. The League of Nations versus rising fascism. The League of Nations might have had a few wins under its belt in the 1920s, smoothing out some territorial squabbles here and there, but when it came to dealing with the big boys on the block, well, let's just say it fell short. Take Italy, for instance. Benito Mussolini strutted onto the scene, dreaming of resurrecting the glory days of the Roman Empire. With his eye on the prize, he started eyeing up neighboring territories like Greece, Albania, and Yugoslavia, hungry for a slice of the pie. And as he tightened his grip on power, morphing into a full-blown dictator by 1925, the League could do little but watch. Meanwhile, up north, Germany was a powder keg waiting to explode. Years of political chaos and economic turmoil set the stage for the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. Promising to restore Germany to its former glory, Hitler rode a wave of fear and discontent all the way to the Chancellor's seat in 1933. And just like that, Germany was back in the game, but this time, with a dangerous new player at the helm. 9 short months later, Germany slammed the door on the League of Nations, signaling its intent to rearm and flex its military muscles once more. With one of its key members gone rogue, the League found itself powerless to stop the march toward militarism. So, as the world hurtled toward another global conflict, the League of Nations stood by, a mere spectator in the face of rising fascism and aggression. It was a harsh reality check for those who had placed their hopes in international diplomacy. The League of Nations often gets painted as this noble international club, but let's not kid ourselves. Behind the scenes, it was more like a high-stakes game of realpolitik, with the bigwigs calling the shots. First off, let's talk membership. Until Germany and the Soviet Union finally got the nod in 1926 and 1934 respectively, the League was basically a boys' club for the winners of World War I, and surprise, surprise, those winners happened to be France and Britain. Coincidence? I think not. And here's the kicker: while the League preached all about self-determination and freedom, that didn't seem to apply to France and Britain's colonial possessions in Africa and Asia. Nope, those poor folks were left out in the cold, their dreams of independence dashed against the rocks of Eurocentric arrogance. And don't even get me started on the League mandate system. Basically, it was like colonialism with a fancy new name, where the League promised to babysit former Ottoman and German territories until they were deemed ready for independence. But who decided when these so-called certain communities were ripe for freedom? Your guess is as good as mine, because nobody bothered to explain. So, while the League of Nations liked to talk the talk about peace and freedom, when it came down to it, it was just another tool for the big powers to protect their interests and keep the little guys in line. It was a bitter pill to swallow for those who had dared to dream of a fairer, more just world. The League of Nations had all the right intentions, but when push came to shove, it just didn't have the muscle to back up its bark. Without its own armed forces and with a cumbersome decision-making process that often required unanimous agreement, the League found itself hamstrung when it came to enforcing international peace and security. Let's talk about Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. Despite the League's best efforts at arbitration and threats of sanctions, Mussolini went ahead and annexed Ethiopia without batting an eyelid. And the League, well, it looked on helplessly, its neutrality and impartiality doing little more than signaling indecision to the rest of the world. But Italy wasn't the only troublemaker on the block. Germany decided to throw caution to the wind and march into the Rhineland in 1936, flouting the League's feeble threats of sanctions. And just like that, the League's credibility took another hit. By 1939, the League was on life support. With the Soviet Union booted out for invading Finland and Japan, Germany, and Italy already having thrown in the towel, the writing was on the wall. The once Grand Palace of Nations in Geneva stood empty, a haunting symbol of the League's failure to prevent another catastrophic conflict. The League of Nations may have ended on a sour note, but its spirit lived on in the form of its successor, the United Nations. As early as the Tehran Conference in 1943, the Allies saw the writing on the wall and agreed that it was time for a new international organization to take the reins. Fast forward to 1946, and Sean Lester, the League's final General Secretary, presided over its graceful exit, handing over the keys to the United Nations. It was a bittersweet moment, marking the end of an era but also heralding a new chapter in international cooperation. On Thursday, April 18, 1946, in Geneva, Switzerland, Viscount Robert Cecil, one of the original architects behind the League of Nations, delivered this final eulogy to the organization and looked towards the future. Let us boldly state that aggression wherever it occurs and however it may be defended, is an international crime, that it is the duty of every peace-loving state to resent it and employ whatever force is necessary to crush it, that the machinery of the Charter, no less than the machinery of the Covenant, is sufficient for this purpose if properly used, and that every well-disposed citizen of every state should be ready to undergo any sacrifice in order to maintain peace. I venture to impress upon my hearers that the great work of peace is resting not only on the narrow interests of our own nations, but even more on those great principles of right and wrong which nations, like individuals, depend. The League is dead. Long live the United Nations. And what became of the League's grand headquarters, the Palace of Nations? Well, it got a shiny new makeover and today serves as the United Nations office at Geneva, UNOG, one of the organization's 4 major hubs. From there, different UN agencies work together to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges, carrying on the legacy of the League in the pursuit of peace and prosperity for all. Looking back now, looking back at the dissolution of the League of Nations, the key lies in the inability to effectively suppress the countries that started the war. This is similar to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the terrorist organization Hamas and Iran's attack on Israel, and even the personnel of the United Nations Agency for Near East Engineering and Hamas. Cooperation, there are too many similarities. No wonder the Israeli representative said that the United Nations is dying. What is your opinion? Please leave a message to tell your opinion. Thank you. What do you think about this story? Please leave your comments. See you in the next episode.